Is your partner resistant to your personal development journey? Is your partner resistant to creating change? Or maybe you've tried to communicate your needs, but it's not getting through, and there's more frustration. Hey, it's Heather Chauvin, wife, mother of 3 boys, former social worker, dreamer, recovering rescuer, stage 4 cancer survivor. I started my motherhood journey when I was 18. I was single and living off government assistance. Beyond all of these titles and labels, I'm a human being, just like you, attempting to navigate it all while feeling good. My goal on this podcast is to show you that you can live an energized, sustainable life both at home and in your work. On this show, I attempt to keep it real with stories, interviews, and random thoughts. This is not a business or career podcast, and it's not a parenting podcast. It's both and so much more. You will laugh, you will cry, and maybe even get a little frustrated with the truth you've been hiding from yourself. I believe all human behavior is a language, whether it's through your child's behavior, your health, or a relationship. And when we learn to listen instead of react, we begin to understand what it truly means to feel alive and in control. If you haven't already, go grab a copy of my book, Dying to Be a Good Mother. You can purchase it wherever books are sold online. And if you're interested in how to integrate this work into your life and get quicker results, you can learn more about my mastery and mastery business coaching experiences at heatherchauvin.com/work with me. Heather Chauvin, CHAUVIN.com/work with me. And you have a personal question or a topic you'd like me to answer on this podcast, then text me 313-710-5199. 313-710-5199. All right, let's change your life. Let's dig in. I'm excited for you to listen to today's episode with Nate and Kaley Klemp. So they are the authors of the 80-80 Marriage. And as always, when I'm having conversations with anybody, I try to make it real and practical. And I'm going to list a little bit about their bio, but I want you to know that Nate, we positioned this interview as Nate was the reluctant partner. So Kaley and Nate said that when they were on their book tour, this concept of the reluctant partner kept coming about. And that meant, how as females, and this is talking about male-female partnerships, but as females, oftentimes, we're the ones who want change, or, I always get the question from people of like, how do I get my partner to listen to me? Or how do I get my partner on board to do things my way? Or all of these things. And I think what often happens is we're still trying to control other people, and we truly can't. So just because the other person may or may not want to change, there's science behind how we can actually do that in a healthy way. And yes, there is always communication and things like that will come up. But I thought this was positioned actually in a really cool way, because Nate, the co-author of 80-80, the 80-80 Marriage with his wife, was willing to be vulnerable and put himself in a position of being the actual reluctant partner. And before we dive into today's episode, I just want to be very real and practical with you that as I'm reading Nate and Kaley's bios, I'm blown away by their education. I'm blown away by their intelligence. And yet, they are human beings. And what I mean by that is it doesn't matter how many degrees you have behind your name, or how educated you are, or how much life experience you have, you still got to do your own work. And that's what I really appreciate about them too. So a little bit about Nate. He's a writer, philosopher, entrepreneur. Along with his wife, Kaley, he is the author of the newly released The 80-80 Marriage. It's a new model for a happier, stronger marriage. He is also the co-author of the New York Times bestseller, Start Here, Master the Lifelong Habit of Wellbeing. He's a regular contributor of Inc. magazine, Fast Company, and Mindful. He's also the founding partner at Mindful, one of the largest mindfulness media and training companies. He holds a BA, MA in philosophy from Stanford University, and a Ph.D. from Princeton. And Kaley, the co-author of 80-80 Marriage, is one of the national leading experts on small group dynamics and leadership development. She's a TEDx speaker, author of 3 other books. What else is she doing? Oh my gosh, it's so amazing. She has facilitated retreats for more than 400 members and spouse forums throughout the world. She's a graduate of Stanford, also earned a BA, an MA. Here's my point. You can get all the degrees and certification, but if you don't know how to integrate these skills into your relationships, you will never see change. So let's dive in. Give yourself permission to be frickin' human. Know that you don't have to have all the answers, and I want to hear from you. After this conversation, head on over to Instagram at Heather Chauvin and send me a DM and let me know what was your biggest takeaway from today's conversation. Let's go. So welcome, Kaley and Nate. I'm excited to have this conversation.
Heather, thank you so much for having us. Yeah. We are looking forward to it as well.
So good to be here.
So before hitting record, I was like, what do you want to have a conversation about? Like, what really jazzes you? And we talked about the reluctant partner. And I was like, yes. So in my community, whether it's a podcast listener or somebody that works within the programs that I teach, this podcast is called Mom is in Control. And people either laugh about that and think I'm not in control. But what I often say is when we're trying to control people outside of ourselves, that is because there's something inside that feels out of control. And how do we get our partners on board with parenting? How do I get him to do this? How do I get him to do that? I feel like I have another child, and then she laughs. And I feel bad because I know that there's pain in there and there's a disconnect. And I'm excited to have this conversation. And we have Nate here, who was a former reluctant partner.
Proudly, yes.
Proudly. And you have your book, The 80-80 Marriage. I have it right here with a pen in it, so I couldn't pick it up very quickly. There it is. So welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, well, it's so good to be here.
Yeah, former reluctant partner, proudly. I think it's hilarious.
That's how I don't introduce you with the, PhD. I call you the former reluctant. Yeah.
He's an incredible philosopher. He's a brilliant man. He's a reluctant partner. Let's get our identities.
Yeah, that's all I care about. That's all the women care about here is like, I want to get into your brain. So let's start there. What got you to write this book? And how did she convert you? I just want to know.
Yeah, well, so I think we should sketch out the context here, which is we're now 41. We met at 17 in high school in our chemistry class, dated for a while, broke up, got back together at 24. So we got married at 26. And at that time, I like to say that Kaley was a fully functioning adult. She had a job at Deloitte Consulting, and she was starting her own career as an executive coach. She had like a 401k. She had meticulous finances. I, on the other hand, was a graduate student in political philosophy, making like $15,000 a year, living in a graduate student dorm that I cleaned maybe like 2 or 3 times a year.
Oh, the rate is increasing.
Yeah, I'm going up to 3.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I used to say 2, but I feel like, I'm giving myself more credit.
Okay.
Gold star.
Yeah. So like we got that was the context of us coming together. Kaley was just far more competent at life than I was. And so when it came to combining our lives, her competency in all these areas, like knowing how to clean stuff, knowing how to reconcile a checkbook, knowing how to pay a credit card bill, that just kind of like became the default pattern that, she did that because she knew how to do it and I didn't really know what I was doing. So I just thought it'd be helpful to lay down the context there, because I know, we interviewed about 100 people for this book, and we found that was a very typical story, that like the man was sort of still living in his college fraternity while the woman in the relationship, if it was heterosexual, was like a fully formed adult.
And I think there's an interesting piece here too, Heather. I'm curious how much you see this and hear this, that I adopted everything that my mom had been doing. And my mom was amazing and brilliant. And she was primarily responsible for raising myself and my two siblings. And she would, run the back office of my dad's company. But really, she was just an A+ mom, homemaker. And so I knew how to do these things because I was emulating my mom. Meanwhile, I took on a career. I was traveling 2, often 3 days a week. And so I was doing that as well. And it just sort of felt like, well, I'll just keep doing everything. And in that paradigm, there was sort of this moment of, well, I can, and so I will. And I think that the first piece that started to have things sort of signal to us, like, wait a second, this isn't working very well, is that I can say with certainty, I am married to my soulmate. And yet there was a way that the tenor of our relationship was very much one of resentment, where I was like, what is wrong with you? I know that you're smart. I know that you're capable. And yet there's this way that, like, we were joking earlier, like, how can you not load a dishwasher? But not only that, like, how can you not seem to manage to do anything? And I wasn't actually willing to pay attention at that time to how little I was willing to let go of all the things that I was doing. That in some ways, yes, it's true, he hadn't done it before, but I was also unwilling to teach. I was unwilling to empower. I was unwilling to ask for any help. That there was sort of this, I'm going to hold it all. I'm going to hold it really tightly. And then I'm going to resent you for not magically knowing what I wanted, not magically knowing how exactly I wanted it done, and then performing that intuitive knowing perfectly.
Oh, I resonate with this so much, because, yeah. But yet culturally that is common.
Yes.
And normalized and okay. And I'm using air quotes, and there's a whole culture around it. I see it on Instagram all the time. Mm-hmm. And I know that even though it's comical, that's a coping strategy. And that there's something going on underneath. And I just want to preface this and I'm curious your perspective as well before we get into like walking along that bridge. Normalizing that it's okay to have seasons in relationships and a marriage and what that looks like, because you see people like, if you're not doing XYZ, like we're always looking for that perfect checklist, then your marriage is going to fail, where that's not necessary. So I'm curious what you see of like the cyclical patterns of relationships. How do you know if a relationship is doomed? How do you know if it's going to come back? Because oftentimes people are like, do I leave? Or is this just a symptom and we got to look at it? How long do you hang on and wait for the other person to make that change? So I have my own personal experiences, but I'm curious about yours and what you've seen.
Yeah. Well, I think you're right to point to the fact that in marriage, there are these cycles. And I think one of the best pieces of marriage advice we ever got was like a year or two into our marriage, when everything almost fell apart. I mean, we were like very close to divorce because it was just not working. And yet we loved each other. We had this deep love and connection on one level, but it just wasn't working. And one of Kaley's friends, actually, who is about 15 years older than us, she was saying, in marriage, you don't think about having like bad days and bad weeks. Those might happen, but there's also like bad years. And when we got married, I wasn't thinking like you can have like bad years. Like I wasn't thinking in that expanse of a time scale. But I think that was helpful because it's true. Like we have had certain years, like long stretches of time where it feels very stressful and there's a lot of strain in the system. And I think, in some ways that gets to why we wrote the book. For me, if I go back 14 or so years to that moment where here we are totally in love with each other and yet totally, irritated and angry with each other and about to give up, it feels like here are two people who are a perfect match who just can't get out of their own way. Mm-hmm. And I think about like how many relationships are there out there where you've got two people who are a really great match for each other, but the game they're playing or the paradigm they're operating in or the mindset they have is just making it impossible to live together and to work together and to be together.
And so, Heather, you asked this great question that if there's somebody who's listening and they're like, should I hang on? Like, should I stay with it? I think if they're willing to keep doing the work, the answer is yes. That we really distinguish between a reluctant partner, which Nate was, who's like, really? Another book? Another podcast? Are you sure? It's not my favorite. I'll try. I'll mess up. You won't like it. But there's still this, I'm willing to try. Maybe it's not like the A+ greatest effort in the world the first time. Maybe it's like a D+ effort, but there's still effort and there's an attempt.
I feel like he's giving you side eye there. He's like, that was my A+ effort. That was just a D to you.
I'm always giving you my A+.
Oh.
Perspective.
Reality, right? If you're on the side where it feels like a D+ and to the other person it feels like an A+, that if there's any effort, I think keep trying.
Yeah.
I think to Nate's point, to your point, like marriage is intended to be a really long game. And in some ways, I think that's part of where it's so easy to slip into that tenor of resentment where it's like, but today I did so much more than you did. And we forget about the long arc, or to even sort of think about like, okay, my work needs something from me right now. And my kids need something from me right now. And you're still going to be there tomorrow. And so it kind of falls to the bottom of the list over and over and over. So I think there's a both and. There's a recognition of seasonality. And there's also a reminder to put marriage back at the top of the priority list and invest.
Dang. Sometimes you feel like you're playing whack-a-mole. I talk about a pyramid in my book, but in what I teach, which is at the bottom, there's survival mode, and then the state of momentum, and then thrival, and then like this creative abundance. And we can fall in and out of all of those states inside of any bucket of our life. But when we're so used to living in survival mode in any state, and then something like 2020 happens, or, you're avoiding certain things, you do feel like you're playing whack-a-mole with all these areas of your life because you haven't gained any momentum. So if I'm doing great in all areas, but yet, and then I was like, how do you achieve balance? I'm like, I'm not answering that question ever again. So what does 80-80 marriage mean? And I'm so intrigued by this concept and how get somebody to that point. So let's see what happens here.
We set it up with 50-50 first.
Yeah,
let's do that. Pass it to you. So I think in some ways the starting point where we were, and I think a lot of couples are, is important to understand, which is this, I would say like cultural center of gravity for most couples, which is what we call 50-50 fairness. And it's this idea that, hey, we're no longer living in the 1950s. We are equals now. Our goal is to be equals and in love. And the default strategy for doing that for many couples, and certainly for us at the beginning, is to say like, okay, well, let's just make everything perfectly fair. And then we'll magically fly away into this state of marital bliss and everything will be great. And that was what we tried for a long, long time. And we somehow never flew away to marital bliss. In fact, we went in the opposite direction. And the strategy was basically to keep score of, everything I was doing, everything Kaley was doing, and then to argue about it constantly. And so, there are all sorts of reasons why that doesn't work. But I think one of the most interesting is that in some ways, our minds are not even wired to make those assessments well, that we're operating with all these cognitive biases. Like on the one hand, there's availability bias, which basically just means Kaley might be doing all these amazing things, but I don't actually see those. I only see what I'm doing. So I systematically underestimate everything she does. And then there's this overestimation bias where I systematically overestimate everything that I do. And this is like, there's tons of psychology showing that this is just the way we operate. So if we really were trying to do 50-50, it's flawed from the outset, because what I think of as 50 is probably more like 40. If I think I'm doing 70, maybe it's more like 55. And it just becomes this total distraction from connection, intimacy, all the things like we really want out of marriage. So I think it's important to set up 80-80 with just like where we are now for most couples, which is this 50-50 mindset.
Yeah. And so 80-80 is really, it's a two-part new approach to marriage in this modern context. And it's actually really important that it has these two parts. The first part is the mindset, which is where we talk about radical generosity. And basically, the big idea there is you completely drop scorekeeping. So the idea of we're going to get to 50-50 fairness for the reasons that Nate just described doesn't exist. And so 80-80 is really just symbolic. Is it 90-90? Is it 75-75? It doesn't matter. The idea is to drop scorekeeping and strive for generosity. And that mindset is absolutely essential to then be able to implement it in a structure. That if you then say, okay, well, so how are we going to organize our lives? What are our priorities going to be? What are we going to say no to in the form of boundaries? What are our roles going to be? Who's going to do what? If you try to have those conversations about the structure of your life from a mentality of fairness, you won't get very far. You basically just end up arguing about how this new structure is also, unfair. And so you start with generosity and then you make it real with structure. And if you do it really well, then in 80-80, it feels like you've really got a partner and that you win together.
Okay. I'm sure it's not as easy or emotionally. Here's my thing. I've been reframing easy and hard to, I'm sure it's not as emotionally comfortable to do the work as it is to stay in that state of anger or resentment. And what I was hearing is, from the 50-50 analogy, I hear that a lot from my clients when they come in. Their pain points, they're struggling with the children. And I hear I can't divorce my children. These children, I got to figure this relationship out because they're my kids forever, but I can divorce my partner. And I'm like, okay, that's great. Awesome. But what's happening here might be happening there as well. But I do hear the 50-50 thing a lot, which to me is you're trying to control something on the outside, right? You have this, you're putting a lot of worth and expectation into these scorecards that's outside of you. That's the control thing, but there's something going on the inside. So I'm sure this is a very uncomfortable process emotionally to go from point A to point B, from 50-50 to 80-80. So where does one start?
Yeah, well, I think we can go back to this theme of the reluctant partner to sort of flesh this out. So as the reluctant partner, my experience of that 50-50 struggle for fairness was Kaley was constantly urging me to do more and to make things fair. And instead of it having its intended effect, which I think was a good intention on your part, which was to have me suddenly say you know what, you're right. I really don't do that much. I'm going to really chip in here and I'm going to be a team player, right? Instead of having that effect, this whole mindset of fairness actually had the opposite of its intended effect. So instead of creating equality, it deepened inequality, because when I heard all of that coming from Kaley, I sort of said to myself, you know what? Nothing I do will ever be enough for you. So I'm just not going to do anything, because you're going to be pissed at me no matter what. If I work really hard to contribute, you're going to be mad at me and you're going to, push back and tell me what I did wrong. And if I don't do anything, you're going to be mad at me for not doing anything. So at least on the side of not doing anything, I don't have to do as much work. right? So I think it's important, as we're looking at this reluctant partner theme, to just see that there are motivational structures in that model that are totally twisted and give us the opposite outcome of what we're looking for. Whereas I think what Kaley was saying before is that if we start to shift the mindset, all of a sudden the motivation of both partners, but particularly the reluctant partner, the under contributor, me, those motivational structures start to change. And there's almost like a subtle energetic invitation for me to contribute at that point.
And I think you named something really significant, which is it is emotionally uncomfortable. And I love that you renamed that. It's not hard. It's emotionally uncomfortable to let go of the righteousness of I do it right and you do it wrong. It's uncomfortable to let go of I know absolutely everything that's happening with each of my kids and I'm their go-to person. It's emotionally uncomfortable to allow there to be some space or some things undone or for things to be different than how they used to be. And I think that first step in crossing the chasm of that emotional discomfort is knowing that on the other side, something worth it is waiting for you. And on the other side, the things that are worth it, that are waiting for you, one is that connection with your partner that you so want, right? Like the belief I can nag you into connection. I have never seen work. If you've seen it work, certainly share it. But I've never seen it work. But if I'm willing to cross that emotional discomfort, surrender some of the perfectionism or control in myself and meet my partner, that deep love and teamwork is there. And I think there's a little bit more grace that's available on the other side. That not only is it radically generous to your partner, there's some radical generosity for yourself.
Yeah. I am so grateful for this conversation because I didn't realize that during my cancer diagnosis 7 years ago, the 80-80 was happening because I was such a control freak. And I was we got to feed the kids this food. It's got to look like this. I have to do it all. But I gained my worth through that. And, if I'm not all of those things, if I'm not the exhausted woman, if I'm not dying inside energetically or some way, then I have to take responsibility for that. I have to, oh crap, now I have to look at my fear and pursue my dreams. And I can't use my relationship or my children to hold me back. But I remember just talking about the emotional discomfort, watching my husband be incredibly uncomfortable with the control that I was letting go of simply because I had to surrender. And I will never forget that resentment. There was a lot there for many reasons. And it typically had nothing to do with him. It was all me and the reluctant partner. And I'm using air quotes, but just watching him have to drown a little bit. And so he could feel the emotional discomfort of oh, I'm taking this off my plate because this is yours. I've been holding it all so you can hold it all. And just watching him not know how to use a diaper. This is when our children were first born. How would you know how to use a diaper? I came into the relationship with one child already. Of course I know how to use a diaper and you don't know how. But rather than making him do it or doing it for him, it was you're allowed to squirm. Those are your emotions. And I just see so many women mothering their partners. And even, from a social work perspective, and that's not healthy from a parenting perspective as well to, helicopter your children's experience. So yeah, I'm curious if that gave you anything.
Well, what shows up for me as you're describing that is the willingness not only to let there be discomfort on both sides, but also, I think you said this, to let it be imperfect and to recognize, okay, can I live with the potential negative consequence of this? So for instance, I hope my dad doesn't listen to this. So we left my daughter.
I say that on so many podcasts. I'm I hope my parents aren't listening.
But we left our daughter with my dad, and I don't think that in his 3 children, my father ever changed a diaper. And so we left my daughter with him. And if it was on backwards, like but there was sort of this moment where it's like the very worst thing that's going to happen is she's going to be wet or she's going to poop on him. And I can live with that, right? Sort of that same thing where, we'll watch women mother their husbands or mother their fathers in this same way where it's like, okay, I have 1 hour. I get to go for a walk with my best friend. My husband's in charge of, feeding the kids pancakes. And then you get the text right away, like, do we have more milk? Does Joey does he like them plain or does he like chocolate chips? Like, Joey's right there, ask. Right. And so being willing to live with the consequences of like, my kids might be really hungry for an hour, or they might eat Fruit Loops instead of pancakes, or they might eat pizza for breakfast. Like being willing to live with some of those consequences that actually aren't life-threatening gives a little permission where the image of I've got it all handled and together might not be right, but it does create some space.
I love that. Nate, do you have anything you want to say on that?
Yeah. Well, I did want to say, reading your book, I just wanted to say it was a huge inspiration and it's such an amazing story. So I wanted to make sure I said that at some point. And I also think it's really interesting because what you're describing is how like a really challenging life event can sometimes be the catalyst to disrupt these patterns. And so I just thought it was really interesting that for you, the way you started to break out of that kind of like reluctant partner, over contributor, under contributor dynamic wasn't some conscious choice. Like you didn't read a book on it and say, hey, maybe we should change this. It was like life happened. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's interesting. And I think like, I always try to think that, with all things, growth can happen through really traumatic experiences that we have. That certainly happened to me before, but it can also happen more intentionally. So like I love the point you make in the book. You don't have to be diagnosed with cancer to make some of these changes. There's a friendlier path that you can take.
And I wonder if there isn't a way to use sort of, hopefully we are nearing the end of COVID as a catalyst to re-examine some of these practices where, especially if during this time you've fallen into something where you go, wait a second, this is unsustainable, or this is really not serving, or gosh, I am really creating a lot of suffering inside and I'm judging out there. What can I change in here? There can be sort of this moment of a catalyst to say, hey, are you willing to, for instance, sit down with a sheet of paper and look at what we're both up to? And rather than using it as an opportunity to blame each other for why we're overwhelmed, to say, can we create a structure that's more kind, more friendly, more generous to both of us?
Yeah, I love this. I was going to ask you the question of, the beginner who's like, I'm game. I know my partner is not. So where they start. And I'm sure what you're going to say has something to do with, you got to start with you. You've alluded to it already and you can answer this question, but look at me, I'm like putting words into your mouth. You have to start with you. But the reason why I'm saying this is because my own personal experience, I had so much anger and resentment, and the story I was telling myself of, I'm the one who always has to I always have to lead. I always have to pick up everybody else's pieces. I always have to be the strong one. And that had nothing to do with my marriage. I was completely projecting my childhood trauma onto my marriage. And going back to the story, or, you making a comment about the book and how cancer was that catalyst, it could be your marriage is going to fall apart. It could be parenting. There's always, pain is a beautiful motivator, but it doesn't always have to motivate you in order to want to say, how can we make it 1 degree better?
Yes.
And I believe the more we tell these stories and the more we say like, they'll be like, yeah, I'll get to that later. Okay. You're going to get to it when you're in a crisis state and it may be too late, but you have to ask yourself, like, do I want to feel like shit and disconnected my whole life? Do I want, regardless of who you're in a relationship with, marriage, child, friend, parents, neighbor, do you always want to feel disconnected? And I just think this is a beautiful conversation, but also a strategy and structure that you can, and a perspective and a mindset that you can have in any relationship.
Yes. So love that it is designed to start with your relationship with your spouse, and hopefully these ideas expand to lots of different relationships. I also really appreciate your naming that it's a mindset, it's a concept, but it's intended to be really practical. So like, what are your initial to-dos? So, okay, shift your mindset. It's like, thanks, Kaley. Great. I'll also go learn to fly, right? that really, we think there are 3 parts to shifting your experience of your relationship. And the first is to contribute from that attitude of, we call it radical generosity. Another way to phrase it is, it's a gift to my relationship. You could think about it, if you have children, it could be a gift to your family, but really it's a gift to yourself. That if you're going to do the same things that you've been doing, and as we've talked about previously, there might be some things that you don't need to do anymore, but the things that you are doing, if you can do those from this mindset of it's a gift, rather than bathing yourself in cortisol and keeping score, it changes your experience of the relationship. And it allows your partner to appreciate them because they're given from that spirit of generosity. And the second piece that follows right behind that is appreciation. That it is so easy in our marriages to wear the glasses of what's wrong, what are they not doing, where did they mess up, where did they fall short, where did they not care, and to intentionally shift to wear glasses of appreciation. I've recently been thinking about these. You can tell that our daughter is 9, just with sort of the age and stage of what we do. But I've been thinking about it like scavenger hunts, that you find what you're looking for. And so if you go on a scavenger hunt to find all the ways that your partner sucks, I guarantee you will find them. But if you go on a scavenger hunt where you are looking for all of the ways that they contribute and all of the ways that they are great, especially those that you maybe have gotten accustomed to that now sort of fly below the radar, and you call them out and appreciate them, that changes a ton. Just the contribution, appreciation, it's almost like a call and response if you think about like jazz or gospel. And then the third piece, and I'll turn it back to you for the structure, is revealing what's going on with you. That I think one of the ways that we'll kind of shoot ourselves in the foot is that we'll think to ourselves, well, if they don't just know what I need, then it doesn't count. And so the feedback of, well, could you ask for support, or could you let them know that you're struggling, or could you make the request that they take something off your plate? There can be a lot of resistance where it's like, well, shouldn't they just know? And if that works, I would say do it. The problem is, I don't know about you, Heather, but for me, trying to communicate by mind reading, it just has never worked. And so to make the ask, hey, I'm really struggling, I'm feeling overwhelmed, would you be willing to, whatever it might be, get up early with the kids and get cereal in the bowls, hey, so that I can be ready for this early morning meeting. Hey, would you be willing to, do the whole bedtime routine tonight, including teeth brushing and stories, so that I can just have 30 minutes to get my head together? It has been a day, right? If you can make that request, and then when they do it, especially when like nobody actually brushes their teeth, they just skip straight to, the fluoride swisher, to still say, thank you so much. That made such a big difference. You change the dynamic. They're much more willing to help next time. And I think that kind of takes us back to the reluctant partner, that how you make the ask of that reluctant partner really, really matters. That sort of vulnerability of, I'm struggling, I could really use some help. And then to be specific with ordering pizza. I know it sounds silly, but just even to get the flavors from the kiddos, to get that pizza to the door, that would be a huge help. Then they go, oh, that's something I could do, is so different from like, all I am asking is for you to order pizza. This is not rocket science, right? Like, he's never going to help me with dinner again.
Yeah, the energy behind it
totally
really makes a difference. Something that and I know Nate's going to jump in here, but there's something that you just said. And I also talk to people about, you can't expect a cat to bark.
Totally.
Which means you may ask for that pizza, and a pizza is small and simple, but maybe they don't even have the capacity or understanding to execute on the ask. And so not always waiting for the partner, not having that expectation there and going, how did I actually get into this crisis, red zone survival state? Like, I can't just always ask and write it all out and communicate all my needs all the time. Like, I have to take some responsibility for how I got myself into this moment of a mental shit show, and know that my partner cannot just be my rescuer all the time. So, and there's no right or wrong here. And it's so complex. And I always say to people, like, you can't just read a book and be like, and you're in the middle of a heated moment, be like, what was that on page 56? Like, you have to like integrate and use your own wisdom and like how all these puzzle pieces fit. So Nate, I'm curious what you were going to say.
Yeah, no. So I think this is great. And I think where I can be of value here is, again, putting on my under-contributing reluctant partner hat. And with that hat on, I think a lot of people might hear what Kaley was saying about shifting to contribution and appreciation and revealing and say like, well, I could do all that and my partner still won't respond differently. But as a reluctant partner, what I would say is like the default pattern which we slip into, which is not this 80-80 idea of radical generosity, is one of Kaley may make those asks, as she said, but she's making them from this place of like, you're incompetent, you do nothing, can you please just do this one thing, right? And as I said before, motivationally, that there's just nothing there for me. Like, why would I respond to that? But also the way she's doing all these acts of contribution, the laundry and the dishes and the cooking or whatever it is that she's doing more of, it's coming from that energy of resentment. And I can feel that. Like there's what you say, and then there's like your way of being. And our way of being communicates a lot, right? So as the reluctant partner, I'm just feeling all that. I'm feeling the resentment. The asks are coming out in a really negative way that doesn't make me want to engage. So if we can make that shift that Kaley was describing, a couple things happen. One is that the mindset becomes contagious. And we've seen this so many times in our life where if one person, woman or man in the relationship, can start doing a couple really radically generous acts of contribution, it's like, as the other partner, you can't help but feel love and want to respond in kind, right? It's just, you've completely changed the game. You've shifted the paradigm at that point. Same with appreciation. All of a sudden it's like, oh, wow, she's noticing what I'm doing. That's amazing, right? And then when it comes to those asks, when they're from that vulnerable place, I can hear them. So I just thought it could be useful, to have a kind of recovering reluctant partner talk about like the change from my perspective. And I think the point I want to make here is that it actually is a huge difference, and it changes my psychology to be more willing to engage.
I think you're also pointing to a structural component of this, which is really, really important. So once you have your mindset to that place of radical generosity, then the choices that you make as an individual and as a couple become really important. And having the conversation about, what is this chapter of our life about? Is this the chapter where we're really focused on, nurturing our marriage and raising our kids? Is this the chapter that's about setting the, financial foundation for security? Is this the chapter about each of us blowing the roof off whatever, dream that we have? Is this the chapter where we're giving back? All of those are totally valid choices. But if you don't know as a couple what you're about, it's really hard to know what you say yes to and what you say no to. And one of the things that happens a lot for modern couples is they end up sort of saying yes to everything that gets tossed their direction. And then to your point, it is that total overwhelm at the end of the day. And so having that clarity allows you to say not only what's best for me and what's best for you, which are important decisions, but also what's best for us. And how do we align our energy so that when cool things come your way, you can say, gosh, that's not our top priority. Neat idea, great invite. Thank you so much for thinking of us. No, thank you. So that you aren't always frazzled at the end of your rope, sleep deprived, and probably irritable with your partner.
Love it. Love it. Love it. Love it. So I feel like I could talk to you forever, and I see, the intertwined correlations with our work, and I personally love it when I have these conversations with people and you're like, it's confirmation that we're headed in the right direction. And there's so many different aspects that we could talk about when it comes to gender roles and relationships. And I just think maybe it's because I'm immersed in it. It just feels like we're headed in the right direction. And, the last year plus has really put a spotlight on what is not working and what is not sustainable. And I always say, and what are you going to do about it? Like, that's the choice you have. Are you choosing to sit in the shit show and just say, that's it? Or are you going to rise and say, no longer, no more? I do not want to feel like this. Not everything is there just because, a bigger disconnect in relationships or, decreasing your health or decreasing your finances does not mean you're headed down a scary road. It's an opportunity. It's just trying to get your attention, and it's a growth opportunity. So I would love to know where people can learn more about you. Obviously, you have your book. Where can they find your book? And if you have any teachables that you do or anything like that.
Yeah. So we're at 8080.com, 8080
Marriage.
Sorry, 8080marriage.com, 8080marriage.com. And we have a newsletter you can sign up for there. We also have some free guides, stuff like that. And then we're doing quite a bit on Instagram, 8080marriage as well there. We've actually just started doing mindfulness sessions on Instagram Live, which is super fun because I think of Instagram as like the least mindful place. So we're trying to bring some mindfulness into there, which is just a super important technique for relationships and life.
I love it. And where's your book available?
Anywhere that you can buy a book, you can get the 8080 Marriage. So whether that's online, Amazon, Kindle, Audible, your local independent bookstore, anywhere that you love to buy books, that's where you can find the 8080 Marriage.
Amazing. Thank you. This has been such a beautiful conversation. I'm so incredibly grateful.
Thank you so much, Heather.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thanks for all your work in the world.
Thank you. Well, that's it. And I wanted to thank you for listening today because I truly believe you are exactly where you need to be. And now I have a favor to ask. In exchange for the value you've gained from this free podcast, I'd be forever grateful if you would leave us a review on iTunes. Share the show with at least one woman in your life who you feel would benefit, and or take a screenshot and share it on social media. And always feel free to tag me at Heather Chauvin. The world does not benefit from your guilt and fatigue. The world needs more women who are willing to unlearn everything they've been taught. Women who are courageous enough to feel good and not let guilt run the show. I believe you are that courageous woman. To see if my community and coaching is the right fit for you and your big vision, the relationships you desire, the money, time, energy that you know deep down you are capable of creating, then head on over to heatherchauvin.com/work with me. That's Heather Chauvin, CHAUVIN.com/work with me. And take the next step in the right direction. Taking a stand for how you feel means you are taking a stand for how your children show up as adults. And if you have a personal question or topic you'd like me to answer on the podcast, text me 313-710-5199. 313-710-5199. You are so worthy of feeling good. Now go do some scary shit.